Got to do what?
Do you want to start the podcast?
Yeah, we don't need to look into the camera. We're going just conversation.
All right.
Paddy.
I'm definitely rolling.
Yeah, we're rolling, Paddy.
Yeah.
Come here.
Are we rolling up?
When we sit down, this is not the Joe Rogan podcast. When we
The Joe Duffy podcast.
The Joe Duffy.
we're not Joe Duffy either now. We're not that
Yeah,
bad.
he's rolling over.
Joe Duffy on heroin.
Come here. When we sat down actually talking about guests, and we were looking for the guests that would sort of, in a way, kind of define what we're trying to do, and talk to people who were kind of uber creatives who've kind of suffered trauma and overcome and struggled and all that stuff. We thought you straight away. You were the first man. We said we have to get you because you'll define our podcast, I believe.
You know what? I could get you cancelled after this episode. Is
that a promise? Is that a promise?
I can do a getting cancelled again.
Yeah, it says cancel.
It's that time of the
If
year.
there was a superhero called Cancel Boy or something,
That's me.
So is there a light that goes off if you start wandering down the wrong roads? No. Listen, I'm honoured, lads. I'm honoured because I don't even consider myself. You and I, right? One thing I love about you, because I've become friends with John from way back shooting a short film, Skunky Dog. And from the moment we met, just our conversations, once we start, there's no stopping us.
Yeah.
And I love that because I feed off your energy, you feed off mine. And
Do you remember when we met in Temple Bar one day and we started singing randomly and crowds and crowds of people gathered around and started recording us, and we literally 2 hours later had to you had to be pulled away. We had to be pulled away from each other.
that is a fact.
That's a fact.
You know what?
Every time we meet, we just start singing to
was
each
that
other.
for both your health or just one?
No,
It was for everybody else's help.
We were in Milano's Pizzeria there on Temple Bar Street, right? We came out. What did we start singing?
Well, how do you do?
That is right. And you know what? You can even cut to the videotape because I have that on a video. Somebody recorded
no
it.
way.
Dave Foley sent me the video of us, the two of us outside in a crowd gathered.
Oh, I want to see that. I want to
So
see
you were
that.
busking. Where was this in Temple, right?
Yeah, it was one of those.
I hope he's had a permit. Did he have a permit?
No, that's why you're
We're
renting.
cancelled.
Sure, guards and all was going around us by the end. We were 2 hours. And the lads were still into this saying, you're taking the piss, lads. This is going too far now.
Yeah.
What do you call that when there's an impromptu kind of thing kicks off in public spaces? What do you call them? They're like
Riot.
we nearly started
Where
one.
we come from, that's
He's
what
from
it's called.
Ballymunzo.
We would have started one if we'd get into the third verse.
There was no stopping. That was it. We had to go all the way.
Oh, stop.
It's gas because that was when we actually met was a film called Skunky Dog, wasn't it? A short film you produced.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we produced it in association with, what was it, IADT. And but honestly, I think the best part of that whole shoot was meeting yourself and a couple of the lads.
Same for me.
And you know, because my goal getting into filmmaking was, I didn't necessarily have ambitions of winning Oscars, making millions and being famous and all that nonsense. And I'm not saying that for the sake of saying it. I wanted to get in and meet people who were on the same hymn sheet as me. And you know when you meet a kindred spirit?
Yeah.
Just, you know what? The conversation comes alive. You just find an energy out of nowhere. And you talk, you sing, you laugh, you cry. And that's what inspires me in this line of work, because we were saying it earlier before we started off. It's about 80 to 90% technical work, business work, accountancy work, all this kind of stuff, and about 20% if you're lucky of creative work and experience and sharing that communal experience. So when you're working with people like John, it's not work anymore. It's fun, and that's why I got into it in the first place.
It's so important, isn't it?
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
I'll never forget actually that night we had down in Letterfrack when we did Tristan Hinu short, and you produced that. Me, you, and your father Jimmy, who's a gentleman among gentlemen, and Foley out here, and we were around the fire. Do you remember drinking whiskey?
Oh, man.
And we were singing, and it was just one of the best nights ever.
It was beautiful, and you know what? They were sitting around this fire all hours of the night.
Up on a mountain in Letterfrack.
That's cool.
Knowing that you have to be up at 7 o'clock in the morning. This shoot.
Lines. I didn't learn any lines.
So my
Just improv.
Yeah. So my philosophy in life, and it's not really good when you're a producer on a shoot and you have to keep everyone on schedule, but my philosophy is you only live once, and you might never have an opportunity to have a moment like this again. Now, little did I know I was going to be lucky enough to have several moments like that. But when you have a moment like that, you have to seize that moment because they're the good memories.
Well, this is the 20%. Like, this is the thing. Like, you struggle on film, like making film, as you said, like business and all of this stuff, and then you get the little payback, which is, you know, you meet interesting people and you have a good time. Like, that's why you do it, isn't it?
Oh man, because the rest of it seems like some days you wake up and you think, why are you torturing yourself? And it's costing you money to do it, especially like we're familiar here with how to do it independently.
Yeah.
Do it outside the system, do it outside the help. Man, there's no clocking off at night. It's just 24/7, 7 days a week, and it's exhaustive. So when you do have those beautiful little unplanned moments, your spirit just becomes rejuvenated and you're reminded why you love life, you know, that kind of way.
Yeah,
and you must see it with artists in general. There's so much self-torture involved.
I think that's a part of being an artist, isn't it?
Why is that?
I think you have to have an element of torture. You have to be a seeker, like. So it's like, okay, I've got problems here, there's issues here, and I can't for some reason fit into that 9 to 5. For some reason that doesn't fit me. It's not that you don't want to. Yeah. It's just that you don't fit it. You don't fit that box. So I think creativity and trauma are highly linked. I know we've spoke about that a good bit.
We've had many conversations. Actually, you said something to me that was kind of just changed the way I look at it, essentially, because creativity really, when it comes down to it, Tiernan, we talked about this is really problem solving.
Yeah.
And you talked about it. Well, think about it. You said to me one day, you said, imagine when you're a child and you're suffering with traumatic experiences and whatever it may be, whatever situation, you're looking at a problem. So from a very young age, you're seeing a problem and you're trying to solve a problem. And that's where the creativity grows from, is looking at things as a problem constantly. Yeah. And this whole industry, not just the artistic side, the other side is problem solving as well in a big way.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know who said this, but some philosopher once said that artists see the world and want to fix it. And then by seeing the world where there's an element of ourselves that we feel needs fixing, needs a void fulfilling, you know, that kind of way. So, you know, we look outward in order to fill something in us, an insecurity or there's just a missing piece of a puzzle in us that motivates us and drives us forward. And I know clearly, because I'm the kind of guy, and you're probably the same, I do a lot of self-analysis. I do a lot of sitting in the garden and thinking, if I feel like this today, why am I feeling like this? And I know what the fuel in my engine was. I was propelled by this insecurity, because it's not obvious to anyone watching the podcast or listening, but I'm quadriplegic. I'm in a wheelchair. And when I found myself in this position, I suddenly felt completely insecure and out of, just disconnected from a world that I didn't quite feel like I fitted in anymore. So I felt like there was this overriding urge to constantly prove myself to the world that I was still capable of achieving things in my life. And that's what drove me forward to do things in order to impress people.
Well, that's the ultimate problem.
Yeah, I think so.
Tell me about your first poem.
My first poem, wow.
Give us a bit of context though, I'd love to hear that.
You know what, right? So I'm 17 years of age, right? And this is after I just come back from London. I was working on the buildings in London at 15 years of age. And it was the best growing up experience of my life. You hit the ground in London and suddenly you're not treated like a 15-year-old. This is like mid-90s, 96 actually, 95, 96. You're working your ass off 6 and sometimes even 7 days a week and sending money back to the ma. And I grew up fast. I felt like I had a little sample of what adult life was like. But I missed home. I missed me ma's cooking. I missed a girl I fancied at the time. I missed all the crack with the lads. I came home and I took an apprenticeship painting and decorating. It wasn't much. I think it was like 35 quid a week. You get more on FOSS. And but I loved it because I felt independent. I was still a young lad and I had few bob in my pocket to get a pint and play a bit of pool with the lads or whatever. But I was in a bad car crash coming back from work one day, and suddenly I found myself in the blink of an eye, virtually 80% of my body paralyzed, and within a minute, it felt like a minute, I've got a doctor, Dr. McManus, and I'll never forget the name because there's an indelible impression in my memory of this badge on this guy's chest, and his face was stoic and unapologetic. He said to me at 17, looking down on me on my own, he was like, I'm afraid you'll never walk again, and we're going to do an operation. There's a 50-50 chance that it might fail or succeed, blah, blah, blah. And then in the same breath, it was like, you're going to spend a year in Dunleary Rehabilitation Hospital. in the hopes of restoring whatever function, bladder, bowel, all this kind of stuff. So I was hit with all of this information, and so from literally the moment of that car crash up until about maybe 2 years of my life, there was never a moment when I was in a room on my own. And one thing I always loved, even as a kid, I loved my own space. I loved the freedom to be able to wander away into my own imagination. So for 2 years solid, I've just got constantly people around me, people looking after me, people tell me what to do, tell me what I can't do, and all this kind of stuff. And I was, at the moment, I was a little bit upset about somebody coming to me with this keyboard, the Hewlett-Packard keyboard, and a little table in the back extension of my house that was built on because I couldn't access the other part of the house. So I suddenly looked at this room with a little desk and a little keyboard, and I was like, well, this is my future. This is it now. Or at least this is what people think is my future. And I went in there. I was left to my own devices in that room, which was one of the only moments I was left on my own. I even asked at that time my PA to leave the room because I wanted to spend a little time in front of the keyboard. And now my fingers are partially paralyzed. I'm not sure if you can see my hands. I'm quadriplegic, so I can move my wrists. I have what's called a tenodesis grip, but I can't type. But if I flip my thumb this way, I can type one letter at a time. And honestly, I'm not exaggerating. I wrote, I kind of, I'm a little bit kind of facetious about it now, but it was a poem. I wrote a poem on my own in the room that sort of culminated and captivated everything I felt up to that point. And I can even recite the poem for you if you like.
Love that.
Because it's only 2 words long. And it simply read, fuck off. And lads, you know what happened? And I am not exaggerating this. I remember this like it was yesterday. I've never taken drugs, right? I've never, nothing that wasn't prescribed to me anyway by a doctor. I wasn't drinking that day. I was just sitting there in front of this keyboard. I wrote my little poem on that page, and I was sitting there looking back at me. It was the first thing, that keyboard wrote was those words, fuck off. I sat there and looked at it, and just this overwhelming sense of relief and pain and sorrow just boiled up in me, and I cried, and I felt something that I'd never felt up to that point, just the relief of seeing that image on that page, looking back at me as to how I felt, and I'd nobody there to edify or censor what I was feeling in that moment. And I remember inviting somebody who's family member or my PA back into the room. I said, see that page? I want you to crumple it up and put it into the fire for me. And honestly, I don't think even to this day, and I must have written a million words since, but I don't think I've ever written anything that moved me so profoundly than that poem. Yeah.
That's absolute catharsis.
There you go. What is it to be an artist? Why do we do it?
Expression. And I suppose that you know, those 2 words, and sometimes when you're succinct, the easiest way of kind of getting your message across is get straight to the point, keep it simple, stupid, as they say. And that says it all, doesn't it? Those 2 words just describes everything.
Because you really fucking meant fuck off.
Man, there was the weight of 1,000 worlds in those 2 words. And it was lifted off my shoulders immediately. And, you talk about catharsis and what does it mean to express yourself. And for me, in that moment, there was a moment of liberation. I felt like myself again. And look, we could talk about this all night, about how you censor and oppress and repress artists, especially honest artists. And what you're actually doing is you're cutting off a life source, an opportunity for us to not just heal ourselves, but heal people who our expressions can resonate with. You start censoring people, and what you actually start doing is extracting the humanity out of us. And that's why I love writing. That's why it's my addiction. And I always say, I think we all have addictions in our lives. Some of them are destructive and some of them are productive. And that happens to be my addiction, is expressing myself that way.
Well, like when we set up this podcast, one of the things we wanted to explore, and one of the central things that we will continue to explore, is creativity and the power of it. Like, and for the people at home, of this being our first podcast with a guest, and that Tiernan is a psychologist, a psychotherapist, integrative psychotherapist, and a cognitive scientist. So he's a particular interest in this. And Tiernan actually designed a program, and one of the main kind of pillars of the program there is creativity, because you know the data, you know what actually this does on a scientific level.
Yeah, and I suppose what creativity really does is gives the potential for something else. So we are kind of creatures of habit, and we do fall into our little structured lives and routines, and nobody likes change. Everybody does everything to avoid change. As they say, therapy, for example, is when somebody comes to a therapist and they ask to change things and then actively fight for 99% of the time against doing any changes or making changes. Yeah. So people don't like change by their very nature. And we do fall into these structures. But creativity asks you to experiment with the prospect of change, thinking, doing things differently than you would have before you were creative.
You're so right. That's when the acting happened for me. It was the same, thinking completely negative, doomed, hate myself, the world hates me. Acting comes in.
But you would have felt safe there. You know?
Yeah, no, I did. No, I wanted to run away from it.
Yeah,
I was going to run away from the acting class, and then I decided to stay. Yeah. But actually, that's what it was when I came home that night, and my fucking brain was on fire, like, and I couldn't sleep. It was that idea, a prospect of change. Yeah. Actually, it might be a better future. You know what I mean? Because
sometimes the devil you know is better than the devil you don't.
Yeah. But you know what? You know the frog in the hot water analogy.
Go on, give it to me.
You know that one, the frog in the. I don't know how it actually goes, but there's a frog sitting in a basin of water, and it's warm, and he's chilling, and it's nice, it's cool, and it gets hotter and hotter. This is a test in a lab. The water, they'll keep raising the heat in the water, and the frog's nice and comfortable and cozy, and he's in that routine. It's his space. Hotter and hotter and hotter, up to the point they will keep raising the temperature in the water up to the point where it'll actually kill the frog, because the frog is stuck in such a rut of a state that he would rather die in the heat than actually change the environment by making that move and getting out of there. You know what I mean? It's a test they've done, and I think they've sort of equate that, or at least use that as an analogy for human beings, that the fact that there is such a resistance to change that you find even in, like we see it in, say, domestic abusive relationships. Yeah, they ask that obvious question, why do you stay in it? Because it's what we know and it's what we feel is right for us at that particular time. It's like, it's who I am, we believe. And it's only then in hindsight that we're, Jesus, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? Why did I do that? And that's one of the challenges I've always forced on myself down through the last, say, 20 years. I forced myself into uncomfortable positions where I'm not quite sure, can we get this done? Can we get it over the line? Like making a movie, you're not quite sure, especially when you're raising the money yourself. And there's something about that, although it's torturous at times, by God, you feel alive. You feel alive, you know what I mean?
You're taking risks.
That's why I could never do the 9 to 5, 5 day a week job. I could never do it. I'd rather be pushing up the old daisies than stuck in a routine of life where there's no opportunity for me to challenge myself, test myself. And by Jesus, you do it.
And even doing it on that scale, those low budget features, me and Tiernan know a thing or two about that as well. I understand. Tiernan already lost his hair beforehand. Now mine's gone.
Yeah. But, I used to have beautiful golden locks. Like,
although it is hell, it is exhilarating. You know what I mean? Like,
can I ask you then, because I do know you very intimately, and is it fair then to say that your pathway into art was through trauma, or was it trauma that pushed you through the door?
Yeah. So by the time I was 20, I gained about 8 stone in 18 months after quitting boxing. Got really depressed. Didn't smile, lost all my friends, wouldn't smile at anybody. And I locked myself in a box room in Darndale. And I finally made the decision I'm going to kill myself, to relieve myself. The only thing that stopped me beforehand was my mother. The thought of her crying.
Well, what was the catalyst for that spiral?
I couldn't understand what was going on inside me. So the concept of trauma, which I'm very familiar with now, and in big way down to Tiernan actually, because me and Tiernan know each other about 8 years now. He actually enlightened me with a lot of this stuff, you know. The concept of trauma didn't exist to me. I could never connect, you know, a traumatic event to destructive behaviour. Like, that to me is silly. and that's
Right.
like American cheesy bullshit. That's what I thought at 20. You know what I mean? So I couldn't understand what was happening. Things just started happening with me. Depression started kicking in, and then there were life events as well that added to it,
Yeah.
just accentuated the whole thing. So
Wow.
it came to that point where it was like just in pain, I suppose, and I'd rather fucking die. And my brother Joe knocked on my door and said, "Are you going to kill yourself?" And I said, "No,"
Wow.
but I gave him an indication I was, because I wanted to fucking talk. I'd rather talk than die. Like I was afraid to die.
Wow.
You know what I mean? But it's this weird paradox, you know. So he came into the room and we sat down for about 3 hours. And by the end of it, he said, "Look, man, forget about the boxing. It's a lot of shite getting hit in the head anyway for a living. You know what I mean? Like, I know it was your dream." He said, "Look, you're obsessed with film since you're a child. So why don't you just get into acting, man?" He said, "I'm telling you, I'd say you do it." Like, so it was a light bulb moment. And see, why that was perfect was because I was so low, I actually didn't care what anybody thought.
Yeah.
And previous to that, it was always my behaviour or what I'd done in my life was always dictated by what other people thought of me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And what traumas I think, and you know,
Kind of self-conscious.
self-conscious and being emasculated there, and the big thing of losing my father at a young age.
Yeah.
And I always had to prove myself as a man.
Yeah.
So I googled acting classes in Dublin. The Abbey came up, and Abbey School of Drama and Music, with nothing got to do with the Abbey Theatre, but it was on Abbey Street. And I asked to do a course, and Kathleen Warner Yates said, who was the head of the Abbey, said, "There's an adult for fun class." And me being mad depressed, adult for fun didn't sound good. So I said, "If you had, is there anything else?" He said, "There's an advanced scene study, but like they're all professional actors who've been working for years and went to college, got degrees and whatever."
Yeah.
So I still think it's a degree in acting is a silly thing. I think you need a degree in life before you can act. You know what I mean? But anyway,
Yeah.
I says, "Listen, I'll do it." But I didn't even have the money. I had like 20 euro left out of my dole, and it was the next day. So I got the rest of the money out of my uncle, my brother Joe, and I got a £5 off my mummy to get the bus in and out of town at the time. The bus was like 2.20 at the time. And I went into the thing, and we all sat around a circle like this. And everybody explained the experience that they had, and it came out to me, I was shitting it. And I said, "I have to get out of there." And they were all laughing at me, kind of sniggering, because I'd never acted before. And I said, "I'm going." And then it was that thing of running away, Tiernan, you know, getting comfortable. I said, "I'll just go home and I'll get a munch and I'll get a bottle of wine and I'll watch The Sopranos."
You were the frog getting back into that.
Yeah,
right?
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
So then what happened was I seen a scene unfold in front of my eyes, and it was this kind of upper class Dublin fella, very posh, and this black Brazilian man. Now, he was raised, doesn't matter to me, but for the story it's relevant. And the Dublin fella was the customer that dictated the improvisation, and the shopkeeper was this Brazilian man. So he pretended it was like a protein shop because he was in good shape, like, and I want vanilla protein. But then he started kind of being very patronising towards this Brazilian man and then mocking his accent, and I thought it was racist. So I got enraged and I fantasised about throwing him out the second floor building and killing him. And obviously didn't do that. But then the improv broke up and the Dublin fella became the shopkeeper, and he wanted someone to be the customer to dictate the scene, the improv. So I volunteered out of rage. And then I walked outside the door, and when it was like one of those moments in America, you know, one of the Hollywood cheesy films where I was like, run away, bury your head in the sand like an ostrich, should be comfortably be grand one day. I could see myself going home, but I was too angry. So I broke through the door, and I went over, slapped him, robbed this plate, the bank guy met at the bank, and robbed the bank, took off his shoes, took off his socks, halfway taken off his tracksuit bottoms. When the teacher came in, Julie Shearer, the classically trained Shakespearean teacher, Australian, John, please stop now. And I said, "Oh shit." So I ran out of the class, ran down the stairs. She went after John. And I said, "Please don't call the guards." I ran down the street. She came out of the street after me. She finally just let the biggest roar ever, like she was on the fucking Abbey stage roaring, "John, come back now." And I said, "What's going on?" She said, "You're fucking crazy." And I said, "Right, but I like it." I said, "Okay." She said, "Look, let's come up and see if we can harness what you fucking have.
here we
It's
can work
fucking
with."
crazy, like, but please don't ever touch any of my fucking students again or you will go the next time."
But you know what I'm just thinking?
Yeah.
Thank God.
Yeah.
No, not for that. That you didn't go into the acting for fun.
Imagine. I'd say this is shite.
Oh my
So that was it. So it was. But then the feeling of actually doing the improv was this mad feeling of fuck me, like this is a different world, like a portal. And the thing of what you said, Tiernan, the opportunity for, like, because I went home thinking that's it, my life's changed. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I have a different life.
Yeah.
My life is actually a different life from discovering this thing that now I know I was probably destined to do.
Yeah, and you took a chance.
I took a chance, and I literally all the trauma, all that had to come out in one way or another, and it was coming out in bad behaviour. And for the first time, I found a vehicle to put it in, like, in good behaviour. You know.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. And there's like some of my favorite actors. They're probably a little bit bonkers in
Yeah.
they're almost a little bit socially inept, or nowadays they'd refer to it as on the spectrum or whatever.
Yeah.
But what you're doing there as an actor, you're kind of, it's almost like an exorcism. Like there's some kind of a demon or something that you have to, depend on the character you have to research or play, you can kind of exercise that, or at least have the ability to be able to bring this energy forward and let it almost vicariously work itself through you, and you subject yourself to that experience. I don't know how actors do it, and I mean the good actors, the actors that aren't quite acting, but they're channeling something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, they do because they have to.
Why is that?
They have to do. They have to express something, and they happen to come across this thing. Just like me, I happen to come across acting. If I didn't,
you wouldn't be here today.
No,
You'd be expressing it in a different way.
I was, and it was expressed in bad ways, in very bad ways, for about 2 years straight, 3 years straight, really bad ways. So finally, this is something that was to express it in a positive way. You know yourself, Tiernan, from coming from similar
this
stuff.
is the thing, you know, you repress these kind of emotions and traumas and stuff, they will come to the surface, you know. And the thing is, once they come to the surface and you haven't dealt with it, or you're not looking into it at the very least, then you have very little control of what way it's going to come out.
The quote you said to me, it sounds easy to say, it changed my life. What's not said becomes a symptom.
What's not said becomes a symptom. Yeah, I'd get behind that. Yeah.
Do you want to give me a bit of background to that, Tiernan?
Yeah, I suppose it's all about kind of repression, isn't it? And I suppose, you know, when it comes to kind of psychotherapy and I suppose treating kind of mental health disorders with non-medication, it's about kind of expressing yourself to a point that you dig deep into the places that you would fear to go. And I think language brings us there. We have language, and language is there to communicate how we're feeling with other people. And in some ways hope that they come and give you the support that you need, or at least like Joe, the way Joe kind of advised you to go along the kind of route towards acting. I think language is a thing that invites people in. And I think when people have acute kind of mental health symptoms, the first thing they lose is the ability. You see it in schizophrenia. They lose the ability to use language. So if you lose the ability to talk about the way you feel or to express yourself in that way and to invite people in, then the symptoms get a lot worse. So what isn't said becomes a symptom, and it'll eventually bubble up to the surface. And that's the kind of conscious level stuff. And then there's a whole different philosophy around the kind of the unconscious level of repressing things and how people react to kind of repressed thoughts. They might overcompensate, try to be, like in some ways it might be argued, Paddy, that because your accident and the way that you see the world would perceive you, that you overcompensated to go above and beyond, you know. So there's certain ways we deal with information, and if we don't deal with it, it becomes a symptom, you know.
You know, that's even just what you said there is eye-opening stuff. But you know, there's also, when you do hold stuff back, even subconsciously, even when you're not aware of it, that this sort of sense of shame and guilt rises up, and you create even more. You know, it's sort of, you know, it exacerbates its own symptom by holding it back and knowing that at some point you need to let it go somewhere. And sadly, it'll come out, like you said, in a destructive way, and there's no going back sometimes. I think we've lost a lot of great human beings that we can't ever get back because they maybe perform the ultimate action that there's, you know, because of that. Well, this is all I can say. And, you know, I don't think there's anything more tragic, especially when it comes to suicide, and especially when it comes to somebody who on the surface looks like they have the whole lives ahead of themselves. They look in their physical health, they look like they're not too bad at home, well set up, and then they end it and it's over and there's no coming back. And that triggers something in us, thinking, how can somebody who on the surface looks like they have everything they need, everything they're equipped to lead a successful life, what is it that drives somebody to the point where they think, well, I've nowhere else to go? The best thing I can do in my life right now is actually end my life. What does it take for a brain to be that in that state of mind? And you've been there, and thank God I've never been at that point, but I've seen people and I've lost people. And it makes you think, because not everyone has the courage. Like, that must have took some courage for you to put yourself, especially as a man, a traveling man, to leave yourself vulnerable in front of people that you might not necessarily see eye to eye from a different socioeconomic background. You've got to leave yourself bare naked in front of them to be criticized.
Well, first of all, to get me to the class was not courage, it was more desperateness.
Yeah.
And then to get me up acting was rage.
Rage.
Because depression and rage are like Siamese twins, like.
Wow.
You can just go bap, it's like whiplash, you know, and I can still go to rage at any point in time, like, that's the way I am.
Wow.
But sometimes rage fucking helps as well, like. But it was the rage of, I saw an injustice that I could fucking relate to, this fucking black Brazilian man and me being a traveller, and I want to fucking kill this fella, you know what I mean? So anger kind of, and then I could act angry very easy, you know what I mean? And it was, figuring out the other stuff was harder, how to act vulnerable. That was fucking hard. You know what I mean? I wouldn't let it down. It's all these walls, and I didn't realise I had them all. I couldn't be vulnerable. Like,
what pushed you to the point where you could kind of get a grasp of vulnerability?
I think, Tiernan, it was probably I did a second kind of class course, and I watched the other actors and how they were doing it and how they were okay and that they were safe. You know what I mean? Because it's just going like drop a guard. You know what I mean? And I'm going to be judged. Just this fucking, we beat ourselves with the fucking stick. And I just saw them all, and it was all a safe space, and you just had this great teacher. And then one day I had a really cathartic moment of just absolute raw emotion, and I kind of cried just randomly. And you can't really, it's hard for men to cry on camera, even. Even male actors, like some of them can't, and they have to use the tear sticks and all that. But it sometimes it just comes out, they say it's just in charge of the gods, but it came out that time, and I was like, okay. And then the reaction was, that's good. You know what I mean? And fair play to you, got it out. And I was just like, okay, that's a little key of just unlocked, or a little thing of unlocked. And then I remember doing my first film, King of the Travellers, and I had to do it, and what I did was I used emotional memory for it. One of the kind of tactics, one of the main three kind of four tactics to get to emotional place. Emotional memory comes from the method of Strasbourg and all that, obviously derives from Stanislavski. And there's particular memories for me that always work. Now, that's a heavy criticised way of doing it, emotional memory. But there's a particular few that always just goes for me. So it's effective then, you know what I mean? And then you just go, now one day you just realise, oh, now I'm an actor.
Yeah.
And now I have to act now. And my tools are emotions. Do you know what I mean?
Well, is it healthy then to store away, like in a little private hard drive in the back of your brain that you store away and bring it out whenever you need it? Is that, what does that do to the
Well,
to
that's
the brain?
what's debated, isn't it? What do you think, Tiernan?
Is it healthy long term?
Well, I suppose if you look at the acting fraternity, and you see, you know, people that go into the kind of meta roles, or you know, they're holding these kind of
Marlon Brando.
yeah, you know what I mean. You can see that they're very traumatized individuals, and in some ways, you know, there's a positive way of dealing with it and a negative way. And I suppose if you're holding it because you want to use it as a performance tool, then it's still going to come up at, you know, in your life when you don't necessarily want to, and you see actors kind of going off, you know, off track and suffering with like, it's well known that a lot of, you know, actors is like comedians with depression. You know, it's well known that a lot of comedians, it's the, you know, tears of a clown kind of analogy. But I suppose it's you know, if it's there and you're dealing with it in a different way other than just bottling it in and using it as a source for
you're right.
emotional expression.
Because I done that for the best part of a decade. Then I realised that's not going to work.
Yeah.
I actually have to talk about this as well. Like, you can't just go out there and unleash this on the world and be grand. It'll express what you are. You keep a darkness to it. Then, you know, it's like the thing of depression when you don't share it. Secrecy, like, you know what I mean.
What isn't said.
What isn't said becomes said.
You know what for me the dichotomy there is, right? Because on the one hand, I consider myself to be extremely enlightened and self-aware, because I consider myself to be very spiritually conscious. But on the other hand, as a selfish, ego-driven director, I think I prefer working with actors who channel those demons, if you like, or method actors, for example. I will happily structure the schedule of a day around an actor that can't quite keep it in the cage. Let's just say Daniel Day-Lewis, for example. He turns up as Daniel Playview or whatever. You gotta accommodate that spirit, because that spirit doesn't know the rules of schedules. It's just there, and you got to work around it. And I love working with actors like you, and there's very few, I can probably count it on one hand, that I've had the pleasure in 10 years of working with that have that fire, that have that spirit, and that, because at the end of the day, as a director and a writer, although in theory technically we're telling lies. Was it who's saying is that we're telling lies 24 frames per second because it's all fabricated. However, we're looking for the honesty and sincerity in that performance. And when an actor has it, when an actor brings it to screen, it's no longer, you're no longer watching a film, or you're no longer being subjected to a story. What you're doing through their eyes and through their language, you're invited into the truth of a scene, of a moment in their life. And that's why some of the greatest actors on earth are so magnetic. Will steam seals away from all of the other highest performing, highest paid actors in the world. When you've got a great actor there, it's almost like a portal into a bit of ourselves. We can see the humanity, we can relate to the spirit, the pain, the torture, the elation of that human being on screen. And that's why we do it. That's why we make movies. That's why we've always done it. To put something up on screen, visually and auditory, and there's something that we can see in ourselves that will in some way heal us or teach us something about ourselves. Yeah. And that's why we do it. And that's, and that's why I'm conflicted. I'm like, on the one hand, I want to sit there cross-legged like Buddha, and my mantra is I am, and my energy will just grow and grow and grow. Yeah. And on the other hand, I will subject myself to an exhaustive journey of spending your energy that you don't even have, for the sake of maybe creating a moment that you and maybe somebody else, even one other person, can relate to. And by doing that, there's almost like this, we talked about catharsis. I think it's even bigger than catharsis. I think there's a God complex in us that we want to, by saving somebody else, we're saving ourselves and saving the world. And there's that inner hero dialogue in our heads.
Jesus on the cross kind of thing, isn't it?
Oh man, like, I'll be honest, I'm not in this business to make movies solely to entertain people, because I think we have an opportunity in 2021, an opportunity that the likes of Jesus Christ, if he did walk upon the earth 2,000 years ago or whatever, look at the technology we have, look at the opportunity we have to share our stories with people the world over instantaneously. And that, for me, there's a compulsion, there's an attraction to that power to be able to share what you feel you want to say inside your heart with other people. And that, for me, is addictive. It's addictive for me anyway.
Yeah, no, I get that. I buy that. Like, I suppose the other side of it as well is that, I suppose for yourself, Paddy, I don't know if I'm right in saying this, you have a certain view of the world that other people would, in some regards, it would be their biggest fear. And you've turned it around, and you've found your voice, and you've found your place in the world, and it's interesting how you got there. You came from a kind of, I suppose, a regular. You were working on the sites, and then you had this traumatic event, and that kind of brought you to where you are now. I suppose what is the overall or the overarching message that you kind of?
Well, for me, I realized very early in my life, and I was lucky to realize it, and I hope people don't ever have to be subjected to a trauma to be snapped out of a days into realizing how precious life is. But there was a moment in my life where I thought I was dead. Like, in that crash, there was a moment where I was losing my breath. My diaphragm collapsed, and I was paralyzed, and I could barely whisper. I was in that car in the bottom of a ditch, and I went to shout help, and suddenly the life was sucked down me. I went, help, and all I could do was whisper for the next, I don't know how long it was. But the lads pulled me out of the car and laid me on the road. I had broken my neck, dislocated my shoulder, and whatever else. And I honestly felt every passing minute there was less and less energy for me to be able to breathe, and my vision was becoming more and more, I don't know what you would say, it was losing its clarity. It was like something like a high crisp picture that was run through a compressor, and it looked pixelated. And I felt like, oh, this is it. Oh, this is it. This is the moment. I'm going out with a bang like this. And I even had the time to be conscious of the moment. And I even had a friend who was in the crash with me. He laid his head on my chest crying, thinking he's seeing me for the last time. So when you're put there literally on death's door, and you realize, oh, ambulance turns up, doctor turns up, they do emergency surgery, they save your life. You're told this, that, and the other, fine, you deal with it some way. However, and I always say this, I suffer from second chance syndrome. It's not a thing. Don't think there's any psychoanalysis out there who will tell you that that's a legitimate thing. But for me, I call it second chance syndrome, because from that day to this, every waking moment I'm alive and I'm conscious of this life experience that I share with great people, my family, my friends, is a miracle. Every single moment, every day is an opportunity for me to experience the great miracle of life and the great mystery of life. And that for me is, it's like, talk about fuel in the engine. For me, I can run on fumes. I can run on fumes simply because I have this insatiable appetite for life. And that's why when you meet, like I said, kindred spirits, this energy just comes out of nowhere. But it doesn't really come out of nowhere, because we know where energy comes out. It's just there. And it's up to us to harness it. And you just feel alive. And but yeah, I love life so much. But I think, you know what? Because not everyone, because let's face it, many a person has been subject to what I've gone through, or what you've gone through, what you may have gone through in your life. And not everyone survives it. And especially not everyone thrives from it, actually uses it as a superpower and creates magic with it. So we have to look deeper into ourselves. Where did that gravel come from? Where did the tools in the box come from? And it's not hard for me to see. I see that strength. I see that hero in my mother. I see it in my father. I just see it in the people that I've had the privilege to encounter in my life. So when Dr. McManus looks down at me and says, "You're never going to walk again," this voice goes off in your head. I'm a stubborn fucker. Somebody tells me I can't do that, and if it kills me, I will prove them wrong. And not everyone has that built into their drive, you know what I mean?
Were you always like that, buddy?
I think so. On reflection, I always considered myself plugged in. I was always the kind of person. Now, listen, I've all the insecurities of a young lad with separated parents and always on the breadline, always been threatened by the council to be fucked out on the street. That was always hanging over our heads. I got in trouble with the lads, robbing shops, robbing this, that, and the other. I felt like Robin Hood as a kid, actually. It was like robbing from the rich and giving to ourselves, because we were poor. So I had all of that. But at the same time, I was always the person that if you're walking down a lane with a group of lads, I always find myself to be the one, catching up behind, because my brain's off somewhere else. Even in school, I could never click into school because I'm sitting there looking out the window like a fucking daydreamer. Because there's far more here in the imagination than is presented to me, especially when you can see through a teacher telling you this nonsense. You're like, come on. Especially, look, I'm not criticizing religion. Every sort of religion, it has its purpose. But when you're sitting in religion class and you've got these people telling you how you should think, you're like, oh, for fuck's sake, get me out of here. And that's what I've always had, that sort of capacity for introspection. Is that the word? Mm-hmm. So I'm always on a process of self-inquiry, if you like. And I think the greatest adventure I have ever gone on post-paralysis was the opportunity to, rather than go out into the world and try and fight my way through, I turned back inside and started to wade through the madness of what was in here. And it was the greatest opportunity I was ever given. And I probably never would have had that opportunity if it wasn't in the crash. Like, that crash was literally the godsend in my life. Like, it handed me the keys to the universe. And I always say this, and look, it's almost cliche now, I say it that much, but the moment my body switched off, my imagination switched on, and I suddenly realized I had access to an untapped well of endless potential. Mm-hmm. That's what I consider the imagination to be. And the imagination is like a muscle. And if you leave your muscle dormant, or if you have somebody else telling your muscle how to behave, it's going to drift itself into atrophy eventually. And the imagination, once you start wandering down these different hallways and corridors of your brain and start sort of, you know, this curious animal inside me. I want to figure out why I'm thinking this, why I'm feeling that. What does it feel like to have this? This is just the imagination got just more lucid, more vivid, more potent, more profound. I was drifting into lucid dreaming. I was astral projecting. I was becoming Superman in my brain. I never would have had that opportunity had I not been stopped in my tracks and told by the world that I was no longer fit for purpose.
Well, there you go. Stephen Hawking says somewhat similar, doesn't he? He talks about being freed from the world of the physical, and you know, and the power of the human mind, and I suppose that's kind of what you're describing, isn't it? Really, it's
I always say it, right. I lost the ability to walk, and by default, I discovered the ability to fly. It's the only way I can describe it. There's nothing I cannot experience. There's nowhere I cannot go inside the realms of the imagination. And listen, we use our bodies for certain things, certain even primal things, like having sex, for example, for reproduction or even for recreation or whatever. There's all that. But as far as I'm concerned, and I don't want to embarrass your audience now, but for example, the biggest sexual organ in the body is
the brain.
Yeah, the brain. That's where it starts and that's where it ends. And all I realized through my last 25 years of being paralyzed is that this beautiful body, as much as I love it and need it, because I need this, we talked about body and mind and balance and all that, this vehicle is needed. But here, up here, there's where the engine is, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. This is the thing that decides who you are or who you perceive yourself to be. And once I realized that I was up here, not this identity that the world has a habit of creating, you know, Paddy Slattery likes and dislikes this, that, and the other. Once you peel back those layers or different illusions that have been almost indoctrinated through generations of a systematic sort of behavioral, cultural, you know, system, which is fine because it works as a civilization. However, behind all that noise, behind all that madness, there is this eternal stillness and awareness and sense of just unbelievable love and appreciation for life. And I don't care how ridiculous that sounds. Listen, I've said this to so many students across the country, and they're sitting back, and I can see the expressions on their face, and they're thinking, fucking hell, Paddy's high. Or at least Paddy, I'd love to know what Paddy's smoking. Yeah. And to be honest, and this is why I've never had to take a drug, is because, again, there's a free chemist up here, and I have access. I have the keys, and I can take out any drug I want, and it's there at a simple process of, it's like a combination code. And the better you get at practicing or exercising your imagination, the quicker you can unlock that code and access any single sensation or emotion. And you know when I knew I had it figured out? This is going to sound ridiculous, you know, because when you go into Dunleary Rehabilitation Hospital, for example, right, you're assigned a physiotherapist, a psychotherapist, an occupational therapist, a sex therapist, all these. And I was thinking, no, hold on there, I'm 17, I'm barely having sex, and I'm certainly not going to be having sex now. Why a sex therapist, right? So I'm invited into this room, and I won't say any names, but let's just say, in a nutshell, the sex therapist is telling me, 17 years of age, just paralyzed, that sex for me is not going to be a pleasurable experience. I am now going to be just a sort of a tool, a device that will maybe aid a partner to get off. And I was like, again, the stubborn voice in my head was like, I'm leaving her office, and I'm saying, well, listen, because she's telling me you'll never have an orgasm again, right? Again, I'm 17. I'm not in the least bit embarrassed. I'm just embarrassed by the fact that this woman has to tell me that I'm never going to have an orgasm. So this voice goes off my head saying, well, if it kills me, I will prove you wrong. And this is the moment I knew that I could bypass this blockade in my brain and have access to every single sensation that's available to me on earth, was when I discovered through meditation the ability to give myself a full-blown orgasm And I remember what an orgasm was because I was a teenager. And, you know,
That was a driving factor back then.
You were explosive.
let's just say the last few years of my teenage years, I was motivated by probably one or two things. And, but, you know, and when I woke up the next morning, I realized, because I actually experienced the orgasm in a lucid dream. And I'd recommend your audience, if you don't know what a lucid dream is, Google the shit out of it, because I'm in this state of complete awareness in this lucid dream. Have you ever had a lucid dream?
I have, yeah.
So I'm in this lucid dream, right? For the record, right, I never in 25 years do I ever dream that I'm paralyzed. I am always walking in my imagination. I always have the full ability of body coordination to do whatever I want in my imagination. Not even have I've dreamt of being sitting in a chair once or twice in my dreams, but I'm still able to get up and jump out of it or whatever. So I'm handed this opportunity inside a lucid dream. When I started to realize, Jesus, I'm actually awake in this dream. And I knew, and I felt like it was as real as we're sitting here. So I'm able to walk. I'm creating this reality in my lucid dream. What are we going to do? Of course I'm going to do it. I'm going to invite this gorgeous ma into the scene. And I'm going to catch up on lost time. And by Jesus, lads, I'm telling you, I woke up the next morning saying, well, that's the best sex I've ever had, and I didn't even have it.
Did you have a craving for a cigarette, though? That's
Thank God, no, but I did feel dirty.
That's the Catholic repression.
Obviously, yeah. It's like, but you know, when you're given access to a sensation that you're told you can no longer go, you suddenly realize that somebody's not giving me the full truth of what we're capable of, and that's maybe one of the driving reasons why I got into filmmaking, is that we are living in a world that is so controlled and so manipulated by this complex system, this complex corporate governmental system that is designed in many ways to create this conformity among a civilization, and by its very nature, it sort of curtails our wild freedom, our natural abilities, our psychic abilities. It sort of suppresses all of that magic that our great ancestors were aware of. And once you're handed that back, you look at the world and you see you're losing friends to suicide. You're seeing an epidemic of drug addiction, gambling, drink abuse, all manner of abuse. We see war, we see greed, we see corruption. You look out into the world, and you know what even made me even more sick? And I mean no disrespect to bands like Boyzone or Westlife or anything like that, but at that time I was listening to music and watching movies and thinking, how is this absolute garbage, this brain junk, so popular? And I realized then, I was looking at it, there's a system behind this industry that is happy to perpetuate this absolute brainless, soulless garbage into our brains and lead us to believe that this is what we should be listening to. This is how we should feel. We need to be young, we need to be sexy, we need to be rich, we need to be famous to be what the world is telling me we should consider a success. If you're outside the realms of that model, you don't fit, you don't belong, and you can never be what our society is telling us is a successful person. So I had this rage, especially, and I remember the moment I lost the love, my first love, if you can call it that. Certainly my first kiss. We lost her to suicide, and another very close friend in the village a couple of weeks later to suicide. And on the surface, everyone looked at their lives and considered them to be in good shape, have the world at their feet. Yet here I was sitting in a wheelchair, and everyone was smothering me with sympathy, smothering me with all this patronizing nonsense.
Because your injury was visible.
It was visible and it was obvious. And then there was this stigma that people in wheelchairs, God love them, life must be fucking miserable. It's horrible, man. So that was a massive catalyst for me. It was like, hold on there now. This world that I'm living in, if I'm going to spend the next 60 or 70 years in this world, well, I'm going to do whatever the hell I can do in order to try and at least have a small impact or a small influence on how people feel. Now, I don't know, you might be able to tell me, am I propelled? Is it still an ego thing? Maybe it is. But that's what propels me forward. Like I said, I've no interest in red carpets and champagne. It's great crack. But you know yourself, there's really, it's really, there's not much. That's not where the spiritual fulfillment is.
It's not nourishing.
I think you said it when you said that you're in a classroom, and then, you know, some people were kind of fitting into a structure, and you found it difficult to fit into that structure, you know, from the get-go, really. I think there's kind of two kind of people, you know, there's hunters and there's gatherers. And I think some people, you know, the school system, and in some way the kind of, you know, this kind of post-industrial world that we live in is kind of still kind of structured for the gatherers, you know. And now you see a lot of creativity, you see a lot of tech kind of companies coming in, and it's more the hunters. And I suppose we're coming into a world now that, you know, it's a gig economy. People are used to kind of making their way. They're not into a structure of 9 to 5 pensionable jobs, and that's a nightmare for you. And I think that's primarily because you're a hunter. And
Really?
I think filming allows you to hunt. And I think it's a case of you getting out there, chasing down thoughts, chasing down ideas, you know, kind of, I suppose, grabbing them, you know, getting the buzz of being able to kind of, you know, capture this kind of maybe part of your imagination and put it out into the world and let other people see your world from the way you're feeling it, you know.
Yeah. Let me ask you, because I've never heard that description, and it certainly make me think. What are the characteristics? What are the differences between a hunter and a gatherer?
I think, you know, if you're looking at kids are probably the easiest way to kind of describe this. You know, you see them in a classroom. You'll know the hunters in the classroom. They're the ones that find it difficult to sit still. They're the ones that find it difficult to kind of pay attention to a structured routine. The gatherers gather information, and they have a system of and a structure that they can sit down, they can take in the information, they can go home, they can process the information, just in a different way to a hunter. A hunter needs to find the information.
Right.
A gatherer acquires the information.
Yeah.
So in some ways with filmmaking, it's you know, the only sure thing about filmmaking is that it's a process of finding solutions.
So is that why I'm single? Because I'm a hunter, and that's my psychological profile. I'll always be hunting.
Yeah.
I'll never be baiting them away from the door. Not baiting them away, but just pushing them back from the door. Wow. So maybe I need to just rewire my whole process.
Or maybe just go to a different field.
yeah. Oh my God. Yeah,
Embrace the hunt.
Yeah.
I love the hunt, though. I love the hunt. The fun of the fun of the chase, is that it?
Yeah.
I love hunting life down. I do.
Yeah.
I do. If it was all handed to me in the morning, I'm like, sure, what's the point then?
Yeah. So I think you're living your life regardless of, you know, what's happened. I think you'd always would have been a hunter in one way or another, you know.
Like the question you asked me earlier, like what was I like prior to the crash, and was I any different? And yeah, I think it was just I'm structured that way because I've seen people, like especially in Dunleary, where you're meeting maybe 30 or 40 people in similar traumatic situations, and a lot of them are falling through the cracks, no going back, suicide, depression, addiction, all that kind of stuff.
I think that happens as well when a hunter tries to be a gatherer.
Really?
I think sometimes in life you're structured and you're forced into, as you said, like, you know, you're forced into a certain kind of, I suppose, environments that is, you know, it's the fish out of water. So I think sometimes hunters don't do well when they have to gather, you know, and I think gatherers don't do well when they have to hunt.
I'm like that.
Really?
Don't do well if the gather. Definitely relate to that.
And you know what's even maybe worse? I'm thinking about this in a completely new way now, but now that you say it, I'm not only gathering, but I'm being handed information. So there's not even an effort on my part.
So it's even more to the extreme of what goes against you.
Yeah, it's like, what's the point in living if
Yes.
somebody's just telling me, well, this is for you now?
You know, travellers call people with disability God's children.
Why?
And that stems from old Gaelic Ireland, because I did my 3-part series and we searched a lot of them through the archives, and we talked to this old, he was like an historian, and he was an expert on Gaelic Irish culture and traditions and customs. And in old Gaelic Ireland pre-colonisation, there was an Irish term for that, and it translated to English, God's children. They believed they were God's children. And then that funneled down still. It was a term that would have been used for a long time in Ireland, but unfortunately kind of de-Gaelicization of Ireland got rid of stuff like that, but Travellers kind of kept that going, that kind of view, like God's children, like their gift from God. They saw children with this, and then that changed through time, colonization, Catholic Church, repression, so forth. You know what I mean? Everything changed, but it's weird how things change over time like that, and how the culture was infected to go the exact opposite. Because if you look at the way people with disabilities were treated in this country, up until it's still are in it, but more subtle compared to 20 years ago, 30 years ago. You know what I mean? Look, Christy Brown. You know what I mean? Perfect example. And look what he had to overcome. He had a fucking left foot. You know what I mean? Like, and became an incredible artist.
Can I digress for a second, because we talked about crying and the ability to cry, and I admit this, and I had this conversation the other night with a good friend where I regret the fact that I don't cry as much as I probably should, and when I feel the urge, I feel some kind of reflex that reels it back and whoop, let it, hold it. And there's one moment in My Left Foot, and I was watching. I went to, it was at the Galway Film Flat. It was a screening of My Left Foot, followed by an interview with Brenda Fricker. So I
love
was,
her.
oh man, what a woman.
Yeah, incredible.
Well, I'm watching that movie, right, and I never really, there's one, I can tell you maybe there's 3 or 4 scenes in all of the movies I love. There's maybe 3 or 4 scenes that will trigger me to cry. But I didn't expect this, right? So I'm sitting there in the audience watching the scene where Christy and the mother, jeez man, I get emotional just thinking about it. Christy and the mother are out the back digging the foundation for the extension of the house, because the mother there she's adamant to do it because she knows the husband's at the pub spending the money on pints and whatever, and she fuck it, if I need it done, I'm gonna have to do it myself. And I watched that scene, and all I could see was, I could see my mother in his mother's character. And I could see me sitting there innocently trying to help in the way that I can help. And my way of helping was maybe verbal encouragement or whatever. And man, I cried like a baby watching that scene. I was disguising it a bit. I was, and I couldn't see the screen because my eyes were glazed over. And talk about catharsis, because for me, as far as I'm concerned, crying is healing. There's this almost like a release valve. When you cry, you can almost feel your weight in your body changing when you're crying. And I had, oh man, that was one of the best cries I've ever had watching.
Well, you're expressing, not repressing.
Can I ask you? Can you remember a good cry watching a scene in a movie?
Oh yeah, loads. Yeah, the one that gets me all the time, and it's The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke. And there's 2 scenes actually. One where he's having a conversation with his daughter, and he was explaining kind of how much of a fuck up he is, but he's not apologizing. And at the end of it, he just goes, "I just don't want you to hate me." And it's like, fuck. And then the end of the film, he fucked up again. He couldn't resolve all the trauma. Back to the old behaviours. Suicide mission, taking steroids when he shouldn't. He just took a heart attack, and everybody's abandoning him, and everybody thinks he's a cunt. So fucking anyway, fuck you to the world. I'm going to die anyway, and I'm going to die on my stage under my terms. And then right before he goes on stage, Marissa Tomei's character comes up to him and says, I'm here. And then he hears that song. What's it, the sweetest? What was the song? Sweet Child of Mine, which Ricky Rourke got the rights to off the Guns N' Roses, wasn't it?
Really?
Yeah, he got the rights to them off that further. And he just hears the song, and the song triggers all who's there for him, which is the crowd, and what his purpose is. And he goes out with the risk of death. And that walk
Really?
just always gets me. Just that decision he made, because he was so hurt that he could no longer trust anybody. You know what I mean? Because he'd been so hurt all his life.
Wow.
You know? Me and Tiernan was only crying the other day in this back garden. He was telling me a story with his grandfather. This is seriously. Just told me a story about his grandfather. I just went, woo! And he's had tears because they're coming out the boat.
I think too, we spoke about that because we both have a similar kind of experience. Similar grandfathers.
Similar grandfathers too,
So it was kind of the way my kind of interaction, my final interactions with my grandfather before he passed away was probably similar.
Yeah.
In respect.
Similar to me, man, yeah.
So we just had a moment, yeah.
What about you for film? Any particular one?
Film, yeah, I think I have to be
Bambi.
I have to be, yeah. I'm a really emotional guy, like,
Yeah.
and I suppose if I go to a film, I have to be very careful who I go with, because I can actually look like I'm unhinged. Because
too, yeah.
some of the things that
I'm the
other
same.
people don't find emotional,
You're
it
the only
really
man that
gets me.
You're the only man that brings Kleenex to a cinema to wipe his eyes.
Yeah.
But
I totally get you, bro.
that's it. So you have
I'm
to be
like
very
that.
careful, because
Yeah.
you can come across like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I've often brought sunglasses in and walked out in the middle of the night with sunglasses. But that's the ego, you know yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
What movie? Yeah.
Oh, there's loads. There's so
Really?
many. I think once there's a kind of an emotional turn in the end, if I've bought into the movie, it's important that you emotionally buy in. And I think, I suppose, acting in some regards is letting, as you said, it's letting people vicariously live their emotional self through the braveness of the actor to basically challenge some of the things that no one else wants to go near. So it does give that vehicle for emotional expression. So cinema's a bit like therapy in some ways. You go there and you will get that effect. But if I buy in, there's lots of films.
Give us the first one that comes to mind.
The first one that comes to mind was the first one I was so embarrassed about, because I was watching it with all my mates and I thought it was a sci-fi movie. And it was one of the very first films I seen with my friends, you know, and it was E.T.
Oh,
And then, you know, they were fine, you know.
Was that
For
the
them, it
thing?
was an
Yes,
alien.
you were.
Yeah, it was cool. For me, it was this
You were sensitive.
traumatized,
Yeah.
you know, abandoned, you
Yeah.
know, kind of thing. And for me, I was just in bits. And at that point, I said
which
to myself,
scene? The scene where he's saying goodbye, or where the bikes take off?
no, I don't know it was the bikes taken off. I think it was more along the lines of when he was taken away. Do you remember he was taken away and he was excluded from that? And it was kind of the other children. He was like a kind of a little child in his own way. And he was with the other children and he was taken away and he was put into this tent. Do you remember he was in the isolation tent? And his life was dwindling away and the other kids were desperately trying to get to him. I just felt that kind of sense. I suppose at that age it was that, you know, I suppose.
Were you identifying?
I don't know if I was identifying specifically from my life experience, but I certainly was with a lot of friends that I loved.
Yeah.
And I think I vicariously put myself into E.T. position.
Yeah.
Wow.
Maybe I look a bit like, but
E.T.'s better luck.
I know, I know. Someday.
Singing actually gets me more than like hearing someone sing.
Big time.
Like about 2 weeks ago, I was coming back from the camp. I had a bit of a raw conversation with my mother. Like she was a bit down or whatever, you know. And I was just like, you know, whatever it was. Like, or she wouldn't say she was a bit down, but whatever it was, I was just kind of, and I didn't say what I probably should have said to her. And I came home, and on the way home in the car, I hear this RT1 radio, this woman singing in Irish,
Really?
and I cried the whole song, just involuntarily, just boom, just gone, like, just, and I couldn't stop crying, like, I was like, but it was kind of nice. Like, at the end of it all, I was like, I was like, okay, I feel a bit better now. Put things into context or overthinking. You know what I mean? Like, it's mad, but songs get me. Like, you know, like even fucking silly things like fucking the X Factor years ago and all. You know, and they bring on
And
the
you
fucking
knew it was emotional manipulation.
it's so set up, but Tiernan, I'm in for that, right? Like, you see me, I'd go on YouTube now and I'll watch Americans Got Talent and most of the performance, whatever it is. I'm watching that and I'm gonna cry.
That's probably why
And I
you're
love
watching
it.
it.
I fucking
It's like
love
Bring
it.
on the Tears.
I love it. There I am. I'm laughing. He's gonna make it.
There's a reason Simon Cowell is a multi-millionaire.
Bastard,
Because if you're not moved by some of those stories, you need to check your pulse.
You're a psychopath.
Yeah.
But you know, you're talking about music and how it can move you. I don't think I'm ever moved emotionally by listening to music, unless, for example, I'm sitting in the Tree Arena listening to Ennio Morricone's.
Oh my god!
Deborah
Did you do that?
Yeah.
Oh god,
wow.
I wanted to see
That was
that.
a religious experience.
That's yeah.
But
You haven't seen Damien Dempsey live yet, have you? Vicar Street. You need to go, man.
oh man,
Then you want a religious
I
experience,
see him
man.
live Tuesday when they're previewing their film.
Yeah.
But you know, I can only cry with music when I'm actually performing it, singing
Yeah.
it. And I know your relationship with music, especially singing music.
Mm.
For me, when I'm singing, it's like, for example, right, there's one song that will trigger me all the time, is Singing the Island. And it's even...
Oh, you're great at that. I love that.
Oh, but man, when I sing it, there's a lyric there. Now I know us plain folks don't see all the story, and I know this peace and love is just copping out. And I guess these young boys dying in the ditches. Is this what being free is all about? And while this twisted wreckage down on Main Street will bring us all together in the end. And we'll go marching down that road to freedom. Freedom. Now, I just sang that there and I wasn't connected to it, right? But when I sing that and I engage my heart into those lyrics and into that melody, and especially if I have eyes on me, oh boys, the heart and the tears and the frog in my throat, I can never sing that song without wanting to burst into tears. And that's why, because I'm so blessed. I have a big garden. I live out in the country in Offaly. I'm a biffo.
You
know, you were lying in a broken lawn.
Remember the line, yeah.
What was it?
What did it say it again?
Go off back to Offaly, you fucking biffo.
Back to Offaly, you fucking biffo. It was an in joke I was doing with the character, like.
You know what?
And you did the neighbour shouting out to me.
Are you pissing in my gate?
And then I said, "Fuck you, you old biffo, go back to Offaly."
And as soon as you said biffo, my friends and family, that was definitely my voiceover.
Yeah.
But you know what? I wouldn't live anywhere else on this beautiful planet than where I live now, because I have a lovely garden, no light pollution, not much noise pollution. I can sit there in the garden. Man, the COVID for me, I found myself in my garden during COVID, the lockdown, singing, and it's the only time I can bring myself to tears is when I'm sitting there on my own in the garden and I sing the island to myself and the trees and the birds and the cats and the dogs. It comes, yeah.
You did an album too, didn't you, Paddy?
I did. But it was a simple fuck you to the world trying to do that album. But not only that, it was like the name of the album was Stand and Deliver. And it was sort of an ironic title because I felt in my life at that time, like I had no notions of being a, famous musician or playing out concerts. I just knew that during that time of writing the poem, see the fuck off poem opened the floodgate. I suddenly started writing poetry. I had friends who were involved in music, and so I started writing songs, and then somebody came to me, I think it was Des McGonigal, and said, "Jesus, Paddy, did you download them off of Google?" And I said, No, I just wrote a pile of songs. And he said, "Jesus, you should record something." And after a few months I'm writing, I'm thinking, Jesus, maybe I could. Because at that time, right, so here's the thing, right, my diaphragm was collapsed. And I was very close to, the doctors were telling me, actually a physiotherapist came into me and said, right, we need to get your lungs back. Otherwise you might end up on a ventilator for the rest of your life. And she said to me, I know by the x-rays and all that, you've never smoked in your life. And I said, dead right, I haven't. And she said, well, thank God for that. She said, I think I can get your lungs back. And she said to me, right, can you sing? And I said, well, I can sing at the drop of a hat. Well, she said, sing for your life. I want to get these lungs back. And I serenaded her with the green fields of France as she was walking out of the ward, and I couldn't shut up since. So I was always in the church choir, and I always sang at talent competitions, trick or treating, all that kind of crack. I used to love the house sessions because you'd be invited in among the adults as a kid and say, go on, sing an old song there, and if you're lucky you might get a swig of somebody's pint or whatever. So anyway, that was always in me, and the singing for me was that was a lifesaver for me. So I felt natural when I was writing these songs that I was singing them, and the more I was singing, the less chest infections I was getting, and I got healthier. And my voice, I was able to project my voice a bit better, and I was able to cough, because as a high quad, even coughing is impossible to do because your diaphragm is still paralyzed. And so through singing, I was getting all this strength back in my chest. And so the Stand and Deliver thing of this album was really me saying to the world, I just felt at that time in my life I needed to sort of symbolically stand up for myself, actually show the world that I was still capable of standing on my own 2 feet and being accountable for any decisions I wanted to make, any choices I wanted to make in my life. They were in my hands, not somebody else's. So that's the only reason I'd done that album. It was literally a statement to anyone that ever wanted to hear it. So all of the songs, I guess, were my therapy. Each song I can look at each song and I can remember where I was, who I was writing about, and one song in particular, Actually, I'll tell you.
Give us a singer first.
You know what? I probably wouldn't even be able to remember, but I will. There was one song. There's no word of a lie, and my life has been beset by all of these extremely seemingly coincidental moments, right? Almost they feel moments of serendipity where I think, right, I am here where I'm meant to be, because there's no. I'll give you an example. So the first song, or one of the first songs I decided to record a demo with, right? It was a local studio. And it was a song called The Vulnerability of Man. And it was about losing somebody, and somebody who was vulnerable, and we weren't quite there to help them. But anyway, we recorded this in the studio, right? And I felt 10 feet tall leaving the studio that day. I was with my brother and my cousin, Slick, the nickname McQuinn. He's no longer with us. Sadly, we lost him. He had a heart condition. And on that day, we're driving back from the studio, and we've the CD in the car, because that's the litmus test for a demo. Put it in the car stereo and listen to it. And so we're driving away from the studio, and I'm hearing my song written by me with music on it, called The Vulnerability of Man, a really emotive song. And I get a phone call from, it was my sister that called me, I think. And the phone call was like, basically consisted of Paddy, of bad news. Karen has suicided. She's dead and she's no longer with us. And I'm like, really, you're like, and then I hang up, and my brother sees a change in me. I start crying, and even the driver, Peach, is looking at me saying, "What's up?" So I break the news to the lads, and then we're listening. The song's still playing in the car. It's actually it was early on in the song when I got the phone call. That song started playing, and we just all sat there in silence as we were driving home. And the song, every single word, every emotion in that song related to the news I just heard on the phone. It was a song about her vulnerability, and how we tragically lose people who we are completely unaware of, who are in trouble. And I got home, and the whole community is devastated, because I was looking forward to going home and putting this on the stereo at home and sharing it with my family. Said, I did this. And this was the beginning of the album journey. So anyway, the whole place was just overwhelmed by this tragedy. And from that day to this, I listened to that song, and I realized, although the timelines are different, I wrote that song for her. And that's how I feel, you know. And so we talk about music and art and film and what it means to us psychologically, and I suddenly realized that the album thing took on a whole new role. I was like, oh, this is important. And it just felt like I was doing something special for myself in that kind of way. But that's the power of music, man. When you hear a certain song, again, memory as well. It's certain songs bring you to places, remind you of places, and
Sense memory.
Oh man, what you're rendered almost. I don't know what it is. It opens up channels in your brain that you thought were dormant, and brings you back to a memory, like a smell.
You can change your mood very quickly as well with music. Just change your mood. It's a really good way actually getting out of your thoughts, because I often do that. Just put on a particular song, whatever it is. Like the other day, I put on "Celebrate" when we won the Royark Award, and I was like, I just start dancing, and just dancing in the car, like, and you just feel like, you know what I mean. But that's the power of music, like.
What is it about music?
I don't know, but if you break it down, I suppose it's like anything. If you break it down into its, finite piece, it's where science ends and I suppose creativity begins.
Yeah.
It's
water.
Oh yes, sir.
I think it's a funny thing, isn't it? Because it's a mathematical formula, isn't it? This is, if you break it down to its fundamental components, it's just strings and just tones and sound vibrations. But whatever that combination of those sound vibrations do.
Yeah, vibration is a good word. It's spiritual also, man. There's a
It
spirituality.
creates something in us that is bigger than the
That
sum of its
resonates.
parts. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it does. It wakens parts of your mind or of your memories that you probably thought was long gone, which is probably back to the unconscious. You know.
There's theories that like humans learn to sing by listening to birds.
Wow.
And if you even think about that, and you think about just that connection with fucking nature, that we are actually all on the fucking same signal.
Yeah, and then there's the theories, you know, the drum beats and stuff. There's certain drum beats that are hypnotic, and certain tribes will get into it, you know, these kind of states, you know.
Yeah, when I was getting into meditation, I always wondered. I just thought it was ceremonial. Say in a room full of people meditating, and you've got somebody up the top, sort of almost like a conductor in an orchestra. They're sort of going to conduct the meditations. So beside them, there's this big, huge gong, and they'll just tap it. Bong. I never knew what that was for until somebody explained to me the actual reason they do that. So basically, let's say you've got 10 different personalities in the one room. It's the same with music. It's like 10 different personalities going through their own life experiences, right? And you got somebody that hits this, right? Bong. What you can't see to the naked eye is this wave moving across outward in the room like a ripple on a particular frequency, right? It's like tuning into a radio station, right? So what it does is it pulls everyone, even subconsciously, it pulls everyone into that same wavelength, and it helps us sort of synchronize our energies easier. And the music has that way. It's like, why do we all gather in thousands around a stage and listen to somebody at a concert? Because you feel part of the greater experience. If you're part of, why do we need cinema? Why do we need that communal experience? Because we feel more connected. And I feel like even human beings, like, you know that saying, you need human connection or you'll die. It's just that simple. If you're isolated from humans for a certain amount of time, you'll just die. But when you're connected in a room, whether it's in church, at a concert, a meditation room, or us sitting here in a room talking, you feel that when you feel connected, you feel alive. You feel like you belong. And I think some of us spend so much time in our lives searching for that connection, that identification, that resonation. I think music, even like you mentioned language earlier, and why certain lyrics and certain sounds and notations, why do they resonate with us? Why do they trigger particular memories or emotions? And it's almost like music, it's almost like a head massage. It's just it triggers some sort of sensation in us, and that's why music, art, film, it's the language of the gods.
It is, man. And there's one thing, there's one thing, like coming out of where you came from and that fucking urge to save yourself through creativity. Like there's one thing making an album and another thing making a film, right? And the thing is, Broken Law has went on to be a huge fucking success now, and it's on Netflix. And a lot of people who will watch this will actually want to know a bit more. You know what I mean? Tell us a bit about Broken Law, because I want to hear your perspective on the whole thing, and I know a bit of the story, like, and how that kind of came together, and a bit about the struggle and the crack as well, because the crack was 90 as well.
The crack was 90 in the Isle of Man. You know what? Broken Law for me was, I have ideas, I have notions of, I kind of have a rough idea of how this industry works, especially in order to, I guess, create an opportunity for you to get funding from certain sources to make movies. You have to, I guess, you have to sort of tend to a particular audience. You have to, like, for example, Broken Law is not really, it's not a movie that sings entirely with my heart. But I know in a cynical kind of way that if you're going to make a movie, you need to prove to people that you can make something that's financially viable, that can create some kind of an income source. And that will, of course, like, because money talks in this business. If you don't make money for the money makers, then you don't have people that's going to get behind you and make a movie. So Broken Law for me was almost, for me, I wanted to kick in a door. And I think Broken Law, because of the popularity of Love, Hate, Cardboard Gangsters, and just the popularization of the crime genre through Sunday World, out pamphlet or whatever, there was an audience for that. So Broken Law was me being my cynical Michael Bay self and wanting to put bums on seats. Wanting to prove to people that I can make something that will entertainment was the primary objective with Broken Law.
And then you get to make another one.
And the next one will be closer. Put it this way: if Broken Law is my poor man's Scorsese, then my next one will probably be my poor man's Andrei Tarkovsky.
Yeah.
I want to get closer to the spirit of who I am as a human being.
Yeah.
And I can't do my second one unless I do my first one and show people that I can actually do it. Now, that's not to say that my heart, I didn't, it's like there was blood, sweat and tears. I was willing to go. My life was on the line making Broken Law.
I know, you were very ill. Very, very ill.
2 or 3 times I got to the point where my family were like, Paddy, this is not good.
You were hospitalised.
I was hospitalised so many times, man. When we shot those pickups in the car park, I didn't tell anybody this, but throughout the day, I can't even say what I had to do in order to keep... I didn't do drugs anyway, in order to give me the energy, but I took something that day to give me the energy to get through that day because I was dying. I was fit for A&E. And by the end of that
I remember
shoot,
because you shared it with me.
I'll tell you what, my dad, and I love him to bits, and Dave Foley, right? They were at my side during that day, right? And we had a little bit of Jameson hidden it out the back. And I was exhausted. My medication wasn't working because I was crippled with a kidney infection. I was getting the shivers. We were in a car park, like a high-rise car park, and there's huge fans all over the place blowing this cold air in. There was the noise of that. I had to coordinate the most technical scene of the whole movie, the epic scene where John shoots. No spoilers, but anyway, shit goes down in this scene, and I knew that if we don't get this scene today, I don't have a movie. So I put my life on the line that day, as well as other days, but this particular day, we got the scene in the can, right? And I said to my first AD, it was TJ Duffy.
TJ, yeah.
TJ, amazing
lovely fella.
guy.
Great first AD.
Amazing guy. Man, only for him. He carried me that day. And I said to TJ after we wrapped, I looked at TJ, I said, I gotta go. I understand. So he looked after everything on set. And Dave and my dad bundled me into the van, right? And this is no word of a lie, right? I can't do it because the microphone's in front of me. But if you can imagine me sitting forward with my head between my legs, right? Strapped into the chair, my head between my legs, driving out of that car park all the way home, back to my bed in Offaly, right? It's an hour and 20 minute drive, right? I get to my bed, I'm shivering, I'm shaking in a hip, and the Jameson's wearing off. They get me to my said, it was just, please get me to bed. And they're like, you sure? Hospital? No, get me to my bed. Got to the bed. They had to peel my chest off my knees because I couldn't. Like, all my muscles were contorted. I was in a fever, a temperature, my heart was going, and they managed to get me into bed. And I knew because we done it. We got up, we climbed Everest, and we were on the peak. And I was like, that was it. And I think I slept for about 3 days. 3 days. That's, you put yourself on the absolute limits and even beyond for the sake of this movie. And there's so many times we're asking ourselves why. And that's why even the story, like the story of, I can't even pitch it to you now, but the story of Broken Law, it meant a lot to me. There was a dynamic between 2 brothers that I identified with myself and my brother. There was and so there was so much of my life in that I was willing to go to the rack, and I did. I went beyond the beyonds to get it done. I don't even know if there was a point I was trying to make with that story, but
no, I know, but what you have to go to, especially at that level, and to fucking achieve what you want to achieve, like.
Oh man, it was tough. It was tough, but it was.
I remember you on that set. That was the illest I've ever seen you look, and your fits and contortions and all that, you were really bad, like.
Yeah, I do get spasms when I'm physically stressed, and my body was violently shaken. It looked like I was having an epileptic fit.
Like, a film set is the worst place in the world for you. No, for your condition. Over the stress.
Oh, when things aren't.
Do you know what I'm saying? No, the stress of any film set, particularly low budget, is unbearable. It's especially when you're a director or a producer.
And especially when you're making an independent shoestring budget, everything goes wrong.
Everything, constantly problem solving, left, right, and center.
We had a car that we needed to drive, and it turns up on set, and the engine is kaput. You know, and so many
I remember that. That was was that the one we were meant to?
Yeah, drive off in.
And then we parked up and just made a scene out of it, I think.
We had a bike
somebody pushing from behind.
Yeah, and like randomly parked in a fucking alleyway.
We had the car being pulled, I swear to God. In fact, if you look closely at that scene, right, you see Ryan, the camera over Ryan's shoulder, Ryan Lincoln, as he's driving the car. So we needed a shot of him reversing the car into the fucking parking spot. So you know what we did? We used a little bit of footage where he's been pulled forward, and we reversed it in the edit to make it look like he was reversing the car. That's funny. The tricks we pulled.
Oh my God.
So when you get into the car, right, you can see it on the side of the frame. The car's parked. It's static. So we see climbing into the car, and we pan the camera then to their reactions. So then Nicky Moss, our sound designer, does the rest, does the magic. You can hear the car tearing off. It's like, it's all tricks. You know,
it's believable.
Fucking mirrors.
Yeah, shout out to Nicky Moss, the best sound designer in this country.
Unbelievable.
Oh man, a magician.
We've worked with him now numerous times. We're going to be working with him on our next feature
And
as
a
well.
gentleman.
Gentleman.
lovely.
And really gets it.
Yeah.
Really gets it. And uber creative. And
It's just, there's nothing nicer than letting him just do his thing.
yeah.
Because when you just take the hands off and you say, Nicky, it's all yours.
Yeah.
You're just shocked, aren't you?
Well,
You're thinking,
Tiernan, that's
wow.
what me and you had that conversation of like, we actually don't know what he's capable of. Who knows? Or what's an option here?
Yeah.
Because we're, you know what I mean, still figuring
That's-
this stuff out ourselves, and it's not our forte.
He's the expert.
He's
in
the
that.
expert, so we recognize the expert. Nicky, just go free reign. Comes back. What the fuck?
You know what?
Ooh, like just
How
incredible.
many times?
And many like every time he comes back, I go, what the fuck?
But you know what's amazing? Do you ever see it on the timeline, right? The digital timeline, right? So we're in the sound edit with Nicky, right? And we're getting in with the sound design. Now, so for anyone that doesn't know, right, there's dialogue track with the voices of your cast. Then there may be ADR put in there. And then there's an ambience track. And then there's just the sound effects of life. Like you might see a car and hear a car, but it might be a sound effect that Nicky might have put in there to make it look like the sound of a car.
Yeah, because the original recordings don't pick up any of that stuff.
No. So you open it up on the digital timeline, right? And there was 40 layers of sounds in a scene. So I'm like, and I have a sharp ear. I have an ear like a dog, and I don't know. I haven't even attuned my ear. I can only imagine what Nicky's ears are like. So I'm looking at all these layers, and I'm watching the opening scene outside the prison in Broken Law. And I'm thinking, because in a sound studio, you can hear it everywhere coming at you. I'm thinking, can I hear a dog bark? Can I hear a bus? Can I hear? It's like, then you opened up the timeline. There's 40 layers of different sound activities going on, buried so subtly that the ear will not even consciously hear it. But it's there, and it brings that scene to life.
And he's thrown it out of maybe a speaker as well, like one speaker here, and just that three-dimensional space.
It's
unbelievable.
brilliant, we had some lovely surprises with that kind of stuff. And the project that we're doing with him now, beyond excitement, and he's beyond excited.
Really?
It's just, you know,
the Black Guelph.
The Black Guelph, and he has that kind of childlike imagination too, you know. And it's, I just love that. I love passion in people.
But it's funny. Even in the edit, like when we're in the edit, we edit now for Nicky in some ways, right? So we're in the edit, like it's the Nicky effect, right? So effectively, we're in the edit and we're doing our thing, and we go, wouldn't that be a lovely sequence for Nicky?
No, we could literally go like with the new one, like we're going, because we know the power of sound design, and the particular kind of film we're doing is very radical, and it needs to have a kind of that kind of sound design, not just something basic. So we're creating sequences that we know that'll Nicky will be his mouth will be watering over them,
and we know that what he's going to do is going to surprise and shock us.
Which we love.
What's more exciting than being shocked?
It's just like
it's
like Christmas morning when your kids and you're waiting the gifts to come, and you go, you know.
But you know what's amazing, right? The sound design in the movie is the most underappreciated, right? However, if it's not right,
oh my God,
it's the first thing in all.
100%.
Your picture can be shite,
but again, it's invisible.
That sound is wrong.
You know what I
mean? You're out.
You made a great point, because I remember going to watch a film, actually an Irish film, and a friend of mine, and went and watched it, You might know. I'm not going to say any of it, but it was the sound was, you know, but the sound was so bad. And I was going, man, I couldn't even watch it. You know what I mean? And the visuals were nice, like the sound bad, and you just can't on a big screen. Your ears can't take that torture, like.
No.
And the thing about it, like Danny Boyle says, 80% of cinema sound. Fucking sound goes through your bones, your body, like. You know what I mean? It's like vibrates through you, like, and it does things you don't even fucking know. It must resonate with something, you know what I mean? And it's like a different language.
I think it brings us back to what we started with, which is basically the power of the spoken word and what you hear. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we're you know, we say we're visual creatures. We're not. You know, we hear. That's what we do.
Very true.
We hear everything. You know.
Yeah, you're so right there.
Like if you go in, like let's be honest, right? You walk into a cinema and you got to see a scary film. It's the sound design that's going to get you. Like
yeah, totally.
Do you know what I mean? The boos. And the, you know, the way
And
you build into
so
it.
right.
It's visceral. It's tangible. You're moved. But you know what? And I mean, I can't imagine, but I can't imagine what it's like to be deaf. Blindness as well. But I always ask myself, what would I prefer, blindness or deafness? And I don't think we really know until we fully appreciate, you know, what's the most important source of information that we need to gather in the world. Sound is so we undervalue what sound brings to us. It's amazing, and it's subtle as well.
Damien Dempsey, a good friend of mine, he was asked that, like, and he said you could take me 2 eyes off and take me arms and legs, but I'm keeping me hearing.
When you think about it, though,
he's a musician and an iconic one, like a legend who actually fucking believes in what he's doing. You know what I mean? So it's very important, like. But that's what he said about it.
Yeah, well, that's his window into the world. Like that's how he expresses himself.
Well, it's gone. It's that thing we talked about at the start.
Yeah,
and finding a different world and a possibility for change.
Absolutely.
You take that away from him, you take him back out of the world and bring him back to where he started, which is a place he hated.
Yeah,
you know.
One of the movie moments that moves me to tears every time at that particular moment is, forgive me for not remembering the composer's name, but in Lawrence of Arabia, where Lawrence, played by Peter O'Toole, defies, you know, what was his name, Omar Sharif's character. He said, "Don't go back into the desert. That guy's dead." You know, he's like, they lost the guy in the Nebu desert, and to go back, it was called the Devil's Anvil. This area of the desert. So they all get out the other end, right? And Peter realizes that there's one of their team that's left behind, and he's, "I'm going back on a camel and going back to save him," and everyone's against him. No, don't go back. It is written in the, you know, God is, he's dead, he's gone. And then Lawrence says, "Nothing is written unless I write it myself." So he goes back into the desert against everyone's advice, and he goes back in and he's trying to find them. So the kid follows him back in. His sort of servant kid follows him back in to see if he has any luck. So the genius of David Lean, the director, is he left the camera on the kid on the camel sitting under this sun, and the sun was getting up. It was up around afternoon, and it was like God knows what temperature. And he's sitting there, and then he thinks he sees off on the horizon a tiny little speck, and the speck's getting bigger and it's coming towards him. It's like, is it? And that score, right? The score is, you know, it's teasing you, and then the speck gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's getting bigger, and you can definitely make something out, and the kid's getting excited, and you're looking at the kid getting excited. The music's elevating, and then the kid gives his camel a little kick, and it starts moving forward toward this little speck. And then he's getting closer and closer, and he's making out, "There's definitely someone coming toward me." The camel goes in from a little, sort of a strut into a little gallop, and then he gallops like an absolute bat out of hell towards it, and he sees him, and he's screaming, yeah. And then we see Lawrence with the guy on his back coming, charging towards him, and he's like, yeah. And you see this massive 70 millimeter wide frame, these two little specks in the desert charging towards each other, and the music just absolutely crescendos into this amazing And I'm like, oh, fucking hell, man. Oh, I love cinema. I love my life. It is amazing, and nothing can give me that. Like that does it.
That's unbelievable. And it's pure escape as well. Like, it's beautiful. You're engrossed in it, like,
Well,
immersed in it.
Oh, man. I am that character. I see myself in that character.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Listen, before we go, though, I need to get a song from you, man.
Would you
Go
stop?
on,
Come
give us an
on.
song.
Oh,
You give us a few little words before you have to. Paddy Slattery can't come on the podcast and not sing.
I gave you a song.
Yeah,
you gave us
you
the
need touch
power
on it. You
too.
need touch on it.
Give us a swig of me old vodka, or I mean me water.
Get your fuck here.
Aye.
Your wishes are command.
Well, for the record, if anyone thinks I'm a lazy bastard, my fingers are paralyzed. So I could chance.
That's a good excuse.
I could chance picking that up, but I don't want to wreck your studio. Oh, geez, what'll I sing? I'll give you a verse or something. What'll I give you? Any request?
What do you fancy?
Oh, Jesus.
Give us a
What does the moment bring?
bit of the Furies.
Bit of the Furies, right? Yeah.
You're good at all of them.
Oh, Jesus, I'll tell you what, my voice is...
Do something that's a little bit more chilled in, I suppose. You could do Sweet 16. You could do that, could you?
I could, yeah. But you know what makes Sweet 16?
What?
That fucking mandolin or the banjo or
Yeah, it
whatever.
does.
Yeah.
Pew, pew.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
And without it...
Yeah.
let me see. A bit of McBride. Willie McBride.
Go for it.
Oh, yeah, he's going to sing with me, lads. We all know the words. Well, how do you do, young Willie McBride? Do you mind if I sit here down by your graveside and rest for a while neath that warm summer sun? I've been wheeling all day and I'm nearly done.
Take it away, man.
I see by your gravestone you were only 19 when you joined the Great Fallen in 1916. I hope you died well, and I hope you died clean. For young Willie McBride was as slow and obscene. Did they beat the drum slowly? Did they play the fine flowly? Did they sound that march as they lowered you down? And did the band play the last post and chorus? And did the pipes play the flowers on the forest? I'll give you one more verse.
Yeah.
I, young Willie McBride, I can't help wondering why. For those that lay here, nor why did they die? For did they believe when they answered the call? Did they really believe that this war would end wars? Well, the sorrow, the suffering, the glory, the pain, the killing and dying was all done in vain. 'Cause young Willie McBride, it all happened again. And again, and again, and again, and again. Did they beat the drum slowly? Did they play the fine flowly? Did they sound that march as they lowered you down? And did the bands play the last post and chorus? And did the pipes play the flowers on the forest? Yep.
Up there. Thanks a million, Paddy.
Just by them sweating like Christy Moore.
And I,
Man, that's an absolute
yeah,
pleasure. to have
and
you.
the cameras didn't break.
We leave it at that, brother. Thank you so much for being
man.
our first guest, man. A pleasure.
It's
and
an honor.
we're going to keep it lit from here.
No bother. I don't even know what we talked about, but we'll see how it goes. What?
We'll see the comment section.
And hide.
You know,
All the best.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks,
man.
Paddy.
Cheers.
Pleasure. Anytime.
You can follow us on social media at Clusterfox Podcast.